Hi, everyone. I am Dee. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritually Speaking. I have another beautiful guest with me today. This is Sarah. Hi, Sarah, and I'm so happy to have you here today.
Hi Dee, I'm excited to be here. I know we've chatted before and we just have a lot in common, so I'm looking forward to seeing where our conversation goes today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start out with with you telling everyone about your spiritual journey and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm an intuitive tarot reader and spiritual channel. That's my work and my business now, but I didn't always do this. And falling into it was a journey, definitely a journey. I have been reading tarot since high school. So tarot has been in my life for almost 20 years now. And but when I started reading tarot initially, it wasn't the same way I read it now. It has definitely evolved. When I first started reading tarot, it was in more entertainment, it was more fun. I grew up very Christian, so for me it was kind of like freedom and trying new things when I tapped into tarot and of course the occult and all that stuff. But yeah, so it's really evolved. Initially, it was just fun and different and kind of woo woo and whatever. And I always had a deck. Like even when I stepped away from the woo woo side, I just always had a deck on hand and would sometimes bring it out. And then it wasn't until about 8 years ago or so, and I was in a situation where actually I would even say that it wasn't even that I turned to my tarot deck for help, even though like I eventually did. I was actually more invited into it because one morning I was in a marriage with my daughter's father at the time, and I was a stay-at-home mom and he worked. And so he had already gone to work. It was super early morning. We were on the second story apartment building, and I had two dogs, which never barked because they had no one to see because we were on the second floor. And one morning they just went crazy on my back patio. Like, I mean, my Springer Spaniel was jumping on the door and clawing at it and barking and growling. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are they barking at? And I come around to look, and there's a raven sitting perfectly still on my balcony, completely unbothered by my dogs going crazy on the door, and just looked at me. And that prompted me to look up, well, what does it mean to see a raven? And I found out the raven is very closely tied into the death card, which is all about new beginnings and changes and evolution. And so that was when I felt prompted to pull out my deck. And that was really, I had already been warring with this idea of should I leave or should I stay? And this raven showing up was what I needed to pull to turn to my deck, pull some cards, and actually really ask, should I stay or should I go? And this was probably the really big game changer for me because for those that don't know, there are 78 cards in a deck, and each card is a different meaning. So the cards that came out as the outcome could not have been more blatant and relevant and profound. So if I stayed, the outcome card was the devil, which is basically saying things are not going to get better. The cycle is going to continue. It's about being trapped and stuck and addictions and all these things. It's just not a good omen. And then if I left, I pulled the death card, which correlated with that raven I had just seen earlier that morning. And the death card is about new beginnings, new chapters, ending chapters so new ones can begin. And so it was just so profound because I already knew the answer. I just didn't know it yet for myself. And so that was enough confirmation for me to be like, okay, I need to figure out how to get out because unfortunately, my marriage, which I don't think I mentioned that yet, my marriage was starting to get really rocky. My ex-husband had some demons and addictions and was starting to get abusive. So I was struggling with should I stay or should I go? And that is really what pushed me to make the decision to leave. And so that started my journey with trusting my deck. That was when I started realizing that there was something more with it, more here. And then fast forward to 2020, that's when I dove into my spirituality. But I didn't know that diving into your spirituality meant healing. I didn't know it meant inner child work and shadow work and healing old wounds and looking at triggers and all that stuff. So I was doing that. And without realizing, I was also deepening my own spiritual beliefs. And then through that, I started asking for a purpose. Tarot kept coming up to me. It was the one thing I kept saying no to. And spirit was persistent. So I eventually decided to give it a try, and I loved it ever since.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing how all of the other facets work to kind of put things in place with our spirituality. And I don't think a lot of people actually realize that. And like you said, you didn't either in the beginning, because it has to be that way for us to be able to open up, to trust spirit, to trust ourselves, to love ourselves so that we can trust ourselves and allow all this information in. And I was actually thinking about that earlier today, how it all works together like that. So that's really amazing. And I'm glad that you allowed that information to come through so that you could, you know, deepen your journey with spirit and get yourself in a safer place physically as well.
Yeah, when I started my spiritual journey, that was a good, oh, probably a good 3 or 4 years after I had left my ex-husband. So I definitely had to go through. I mean, I was couch surfing with my daughter for a few months and trying to find stability. And, so it was the first few years I was in survivor mode. Like I could not, even if I wanted to, plug in any kind of spirituality. I was just trying to make it through the day. But when I started my spiritual journey, I had just gotten a 2-bedroom apartment with just me and my daughter. And it was so empowering, first of all, to know that I could do that on my own. But also, I suddenly had this safe space that was just mine and hers. And I think that opened up this space basically to start delving into that, start delving into myself, start feeling like I have, you know, an area that I can be where the world can't get me. And it kind of became like my cocoon in a way. Um, and I didn't, it's so funny because in hindsight, I was seeing a therapist who was constantly saying to me, well, not constantly. I saw him for like 5 years. And I think he started feeling like, okay, it's time to leave the nest. Like, you're good now. But
Mm.
like Judge Lee kind of tried to nudge me out. And so probably the last 6 months of seeing him, he started saying things like, that sounds like a spiritual problem. And that's all he would say. And I was agnostic, so I had no spiritual ties or roots. And so I was like, well, what does that mean? So that's what prompted me to look up spiritual podcasts, because I do a lot of driving when I'm not doing when I'm not working my business as a reader. My day job is DoorDash, so I'm on the road a lot. And so I thought, well, I'll start listening to podcasts, but I was not ready to go spiritual. So I found one called Expanded that was a little woo-woo, but mostly scientific. And they talked about inner child work and shadow work, which it prompted me enough to be like, let me try that workshop. That sounds like something that would be beneficial. And so it was like I had to follow the logical breadcrumbs before I could really dive into the intuitive woo side of it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I love how you say it was a little bit woo-woo, but mostly scientific, because actually a lot of the science is proving that woo-woo isn't quite as woo-woo as we first thought it was. It's way more scientific. And that's there's a lot of people who probably don't like to hear that, but it is a fact.
Yeah, I like to say that science and spirituality is two sides of the same coin, because it is. They're just calling it something different. But especially when you look at like quantum science, I mean, that's when you get a lot of the wires crossing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really incredible. And I love it because it just gives, we've always known, a lot of us, that this is a real thing, but it gives credence to it, I think, with people who are a little more skeptical about it. Not that there aren't people who are really just ingrained in their skepticism, or their skepticism is ingrained in them, however you want to put it. So that's always going to be out there, I feel. But it is a lot more mainstream now, I guess is a good way to put it, than it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that too, because I mean, growing up, especially growing up Christian and then being breaking away and being agnostic, I I guess I just saw it as either you were religious or you were in an occult. Like I didn't really, it was one or the other.
Right.
It was like you're Wiccan or you're Christian or you're Muslim or you're like or Buddhist or like one of these big name religions. And I feel like what's happening in the last probably like 5 or 6 years, at least that I've noticed, because I'm newly into this world. So it could have been, and from what I've heard, it's been slowly happening before that time too. But the consciousness of the earth is raising.
Yes.
And so that's why you hear more about yoga and meditation and these concepts that don't have to be plugged into a belief system.
Right.
It's more like a pick what resonates, leave what doesn't.
Yes.
And which I love because I don't think, well, my personal beliefs are a little bit broad. So that's why I could never fit into a religion as much as I would try. It was like trying to put on a shoe that would not fit, you know?
Mhm.
My belief is that we're all one. And I think that all religions are right to a point. And I think the important part is to have faith rooted in love. And
Mhm.
whatever that looks like for you, if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist, whatever, so long as it's rooted in love and you have your faith in it, I think that it's the faith that's the most important. It's that belief in a higher power and trust in the higher power. And I've seen it in different religious aspects or spiritual aspects, but that faith is what I see open doors more often than not, but especially faith that's rooted in love.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Leading with love, it just changes everything. I mean, it absolutely changes everything. And you can feel it if it's not there. You can feel it if it is there, and when it's not there. And I really stay away from things as much as I can if I don't feel that love factor in there.
The opposite of love is fear, and with fear comes a lot of judgment. So I think that that's probably the biggest thing that people notice when they're around someone that's not, they're not coming from a place of love. And to be fair, I don't think most of those people realize that they're coming from a place of fear and judgment. And
Right.
I think that in their mind, they're showing up in love. But I do feel like when you're showing up in judgment and fear, that's when there's separation. That's when there's things that break you apart, versus when you show up in love, you're able to see the compassion. You're able to see how we can connect and our similarities versus our differences. And so while I do think a lot of the world that is more rooted in fear, I don't think they know that there's another way. And it's not like they're purposely trying to be hateful. It's just, they're showing up the way that they've been taught in their own conditioning and belief system. And it's really hard to break out of that if you haven't been exposed to love in a broader sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is hard to break out of that because I was raised very, religious in a very strict religion. And when I first started exploring my spirituality, I was terrified. I really was. And, I've had things said to me about myself since I've gotten more into this spirituality side of things. I've had, you know, people blast me on Facebook posts and things like that. Not on my personal Facebook page. People are always really kind there, but in a group forum, I've had that happen. And I didn't respond because there's so much compassion because I was that person at one point. I was the person that thought everything outside of my church religion and all of the views therein was evil and of the devil, and it was to be feared and shied away from. I was that person. So I don't respond with anger or anything like that to someone who feels that way because I know how it feels to be that person. But I also know how it feels, like you said, to be in a love in a different kind of way, in a more expansive, broader, just deeper. To me, it's deeper because there's no exclusion. You just love everybody and you realize that we all get to have our way of looking at things. Spirituality has no rules. And like you said, we can pick and choose what resonates with us and leave what doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I was really fortunate because while I grew up Christian, I was pretty young when I was exposed to a different belief system. And it wasn't even one that I got to dive into a whole lot, but it was just enough to know there was something else that made me go, huh. I was, I want to say I was in eighth grade, and I was sitting out in PE with a friend of mine, and we were both sitting out because we couldn't do PE or whatever. And I was very Christian. I went to the like the Christian junior high night, and I went to Sunday school. And I I fully believed that either you were Christian or you needed to be saved. Like there was no other perception
Right.
and perspective. So that was just my belief. And then especially when you're so young and you're so innocent, like it doesn't even come from a place of what's wrong with you. It's like, oh, I just need to save them. You just don't understand. And so we're sitting there and we started talking about religion, I guess. And I said, oh, I'm Christian. And of course, I'm kind of saying it like, yeah, of course, like everyone should be Christian. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
my friend said, oh, that's cool. I'm pagan. What's that? And I was just so curious. I think that was probably the biggest thing because I was too young to really be in that judgmental, oh my gosh, you should do this. But I was also very much still indoctrinated. So I was indoctrinated, but I was still like, oh, wait, what's that?
Yeah.
And I think too, when I would hear about people saving someone that wasn't Christian, it was always just because they were a non-believer. There was never really any other beliefs attached to it. I never heard someone say, "Oh, they were Muslim, but I saved them and made them Christian,"
Right.
or they were Buddhist and I saved them. It was always just a non-believer. So I think it was also the fact that he had a belief system like I did that
Right.
made me just go, "Wait, hold on." Wait, hold on a second. You're not just a wandering non-believer. You have a belief that's different than mine. And so I asked him, I said, so tell me about it. What's pagan? And he said, well, pagans, we believe in multiple gods and goddesses, not just one. And I was like, I remember my mind immediately went to like Egyptians because I had learned about that in school, when you learn about like Isis and, all the different gods and goddesses. So that's where my mind went because I couldn't quite grasp it, but it was so fascinating to me. And then right around that time, Ghost Hunters came out on TV and different, paranormal things that kind of, so I think that I'm so glad I had that moment because I think that cracked me open to kind of know that there's something else out there.
Mhm.
And then when I was 16 was when I finally broke away from the Christian faith, much to my parents' disapproval or, disagreements. But I just, none of it, I had too many questions that weren't getting answered. But I think it started with first knowing that, wait, there's more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool concept. And that, the idea of saving everyone, and then realizing that it's just a simple thing is they don't believe the same way you do as a Christian. So you've got to pull them into that belief system and instead of allowing them to just be present with whatever they're experiencing in their own life, you know. And it's a very positive thing in a lot of ways. I know that it's helped a lot of people break away from addiction and things like that to have that, thing to hold on to. So, I can't discount it in that way, but it's was very limiting for me personally. So I feel like I've expanded and I feel like I kind of sense that with you too, that you feel like you're much more expansive than you were prior to exploring your spirituality.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even back when I was agnostic, I still felt very limited because I still didn't know what I believed.
Mhm.
And it's really since I've stepped into my spirituality, which my belief just I feel like encompasses everything.
Mhm.
And that feels good to me.
Yeah.
That feels like that just feels good to me. It's hard, it's all I can say. So, but I'm also able to look at someone else who's Christian, for instance, and be happy for them because again, they found that faith. So as long as there's mutual respect, that's all that I need, because I respect them, they respect me. We don't have to have the same belief systems. But yeah, I mean, it's just like what I was saying, it's the faith. So, if Christianity it really did help save someone's life and it's their root, then that's great. I think that that's really what it's about. It's more about the love and the being rooted in something that you can lean on. Like, for instance, my mom, so she's very Christian, but she's an open-minded Christian because of course she has me as a daughter, so she kind of has to be. you know, she she's supportive of my business and what I do. I don't necessarily think she fully understands, and I think that I'm sure that she has her feelings about it, but with me, she's very supportive. And I just can't really talk to her about like my spiritual experiences because I'll get like, oh, that's nice. Like, it doesn't land the way that I wish it would. But there's mutual respect.
Yeah.
And I was going somewhere with this, and I don't remember where I was going with that. Uh Okay, yes, I remember now. So, one of the things that just blew my mind, like for the last several years, so before I found my spirituality and was still agnostic, my mom would all things would just happen for her. Like she would be running late and I'd be with her and she would find a perfect up close parking spot. And I would be like, "How did you do that?" And the place is packed. But no, we got one right up close. She's like, "Oh, I was praying all the way here, and God always delivers for me." Or, whenever she was going through a big thing, as difficult as it was, her faith would get the doors to open. And I took note to that. I couldn't, I mean, and I tried to be Christian. I mean, I went back a few different times and the beliefs, it doesn't feel good to me. So I just can't. But I would take note to the fact that things would still happen for her.
Yeah.
And so I've come to this conclusion that it's the faith. She's
Yeah.
leaning on her higher power and she's fully believing it's going to come through for her.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. And you could do that in any faith, in any religion or spiritual belief. It's just fully surrendering and saying, okay, I don't really know how this is going to work out, but I trust you, whatever you is, whether it's God or universe, divine, that's what's going to show up for you when you believe in it. So that's why I think the faith piece is so important, because that is what gets you through the more difficult times. Because when you really surrender to your higher power, things really do happen. But that's the hardest part, is the surrender.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It really is. It really, really is. And I love how you said it's the faith and your higher power, whatever you want to call your higher power. When my youngest son was 19 years old, he said something to me, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, you're so young. How do you even know to say that?" And he said to me, "Mom, I think God is whatever God needs to be to whoever needs him to be that." And I was like, that is so profound. That's insane. And it just falls right in with what you just said. And it's the faith and whatever that higher power is, whatever we choose to call it. It's, to me, it's all the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's amazing. I had a similar moment with my daughter because she's 8, but I've been doing my business now for 3 years. So she's watched me, she doesn't really fully understand it, but I know she's curious about it, but it's still like a very vague, broad concept. But one day I asked her, I was like, "So, sweetie, what do you think that I'm doing when I give readings to people with my cards?" And she says, "I think you're talking to God." And I was like, wow, okay. Because I like to say that it's not the cards, it's higher powers showing up through me to interpret the cards. But like, I'm just a conduit, right? I really feel like higher power is what's showing up in the reading, in the messages, in the channels, all of that. So that's how I see it. And I just was just so impressed that just from watching me and doing what I do, she picked up on the fact that these cards are a tool to a higher power.
Yeah,
Of course, for her, she just called it God, but how profound. She was like 6, 7 when she said that.
incredible.
So I feel like the younger generation is really, they're picking it up way quicker than than the older ones.
Yeah, yeah, they're so open to it. Kids are just so open. And I remember when we were having our pre-chat, you had said that you gave your daughter a deck of cards. And I just think that's so that's so amazing to me, because my parents were so religious and I grew up in that, but I was gifted as a child where I could see spirit, and I had nowhere to go with that because it was taboo in my home. So I can't even imagine what life would have looked like for me if I had had a mom that gave me a deck of cards when I was 8. I mean, holy crap. That would be insane.
I've had a few different, so I have a podcast as well, which I know you know, but for listeners, I have a podcast as well. And I have a few different people I've interviewed who, like you, grew up very gifted, but were in a home where it was talked about and normalized. The only thing that I've noticed with that is a lot of them, not all, some of them, not per se, but I want to say a good 90% of them were still told not to talk about outside the home. So there was still, even though they had a safe place at home where they could discuss it and share their experiences without judgment, they were still kind of warned, but don't talk about it outside because you will be judged. So it is interesting how even those that grew up in a an environment where they could flourish, there was still like a glass ceiling that was being put on them. I had a couple that were interviewed that said that they were told never charge for it. And so there was that whole thing that they had to overcome, that it was okay because it's an energetic exchange. You're helping them solve a problem, and you're, that's what you are. You're showing up as a solution for whatever they're seeking. And that takes energy, and that's a transaction.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of taboo. So even though they grew up in a household where it was normalized, they had to go and unpack all this thoughts about, oh, I can't charge for it, or I can't talk about it outside the world because, my family says everyone will think I'm weird. So I'm just going to shut up about it. But that also dims their own light when they're out in the world. So yeah, it's so interesting. I did have one person though, who basically, it sounds like their experience was very open, kind of, because she actually, when we were talking, because she interviewed me on her podcast, I interviewed her on mine, and she was telling me how it fascinates her that I grew up in a religious, you know, household, because she grew up, she's like, my mom was like you. Comparing her mom to me, how her mom was more of the she used the term witchy type, but like read cards and was intuitive. And she at school, she did talk about how at school people did call her, like refer to her as a witch, even though she's like, I don't think I ever did anything witchy, but apparently it followed me. But she
Yeah.
didn't have that belief system put on her. It sounded like she was able to just flourish as she was. So it is fascinating when you hear different origin stories, because I think there's a reason why, there's a reason why our souls handpicked the one that we got.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, the term witch is kind of like a blanket term for people to use because it's something they don't understand and it goes against their religious beliefs. And that's what they've been taught, that it's this outside thing. So it's to be referred to as being a witch because they don't understand it, when actually it's such a term that has such a bad rap, and it means so many things to so many different people. I mean, if you look back on, the history of witches being burned and stuff like that, and what did they do? Like you said, like why would someone call me a witch? Because I don't really do anything witchy, but it's different. If they were into herbs, or if they were intuitive in any kind of way, it was considered witchcraft. And it has such a negative connotation, and it's kind of, some people just haven't let go of that. They're still there in that energetic, you know vortex, I guess you could call it, of feeling that way and thinking that way, that it's such a negative thing. And it's really not. It's very natural and normal. and
Yeah,
and
I think.
it exists inside the church. This is what's always been so puzzling to me. Outside, and we have outside the church, we have psychics and intuitives. Inside the church, we have prophets. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's always just been puzzling to me.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. See, that's a whole programming issue that society has created. Growing up, like back during the burning times, it wasn't even just women who were intuitive and you know, the herbs thing. It was also women who spoke up, women
Yes.
who didn't want to get married, women who got divorced or tried to leave their husbands because of whatever. I mean, it was really just women trying to speak up and use their voice.
Mhm.
And so I have mixed feelings with the term witch. Like I don't go around and like own it. You know what I mean? Like, just because for me, when I think of witch, I think of like Wiccans. And because I know a lot of them will refer to themselves as witches, which is great.
Yeah.
I just don't subscribe to the Wiccan belief system. So that's kind of why I shy away from using the term witch. But I also know witch encompasses so many different things. So if someone wants to call me a witch, okay. If you're telling me that I have a voice and I'm out here trying to fight for women's rights, and yeah, I'll be a witch all day long. I'll wear the hat and everything. But like I don't go out of my way to like identify with it, if that makes sense. But
Mhm.
I mean, it is so sad when you think about the history, like all of the women, that was genocide. Basically, it was genocide.
Yeah.
But a lot of but society hasn't owned it for that yet. It's just a section and chapter in history where this thing happened, but ultimately it was genocide of women. And it was mainly just women trying to use their voices. So, and it's hard too, because of the witch trials, they indoctrinated young children who indoctrinated their young children with these visuals of these ugly, horrifying looking witches, because
Yeah.
that's what a witch was. And even though most, obviously these women didn't look like that, there was somehow they were able to just indoctrinate this whole culture around, okay, if someone says you're a witch, it doesn't matter if you actually look as ugly as they say that a witch should look. That's not the point. That's what your soul looks like or whatever. It was all made up.
Mhm.
And then, so it's crazy how 21st century, we're still trying to peel back the layers on what a witch actually is.
Yeah,
So,
it is pretty insane. It is. And, you know, I've been called worse things. That's that's one of the things I say. I've been called worse things. If you want to look at me as a witch, I'm cool with that. And it's about intention, you know. I mean, that's my personal belief is whatever you're doing in the spiritual realm is in life in general, period, is about intention because you can take it to the darkness or you can take it to the light. That's a personal choice you get to make. So,
mhm. Yeah, I will say that's one thing I love about the Wiccan faith is they believe in the rule of three. Whatever you put out in the world, you get back three times fold. So, if you hurt somebody, guess what? That energy is coming back to you. So, the whole dark magic thing and curses. And I tell people all the time, I don't believe in curses. But I believe in the power of curses. So if someone were to come to me and say, I have a family curse, okay, and if all this evidence and everything else, my stance is, well, you're giving it power by believing in it. The moment you say this is ridiculous, this is ludicrous, I'm not going to entertain this anymore, is the moment that curse no longer has any power over you. And that's been my take on it for a few years now, is I don't entertain it, and I don't believe it's even really a thing. I think it's a thing if you let fear manifest itself. That's otherwise I don't think that stuff can touch you. I really feel like it's when you choose to be in love and light, you're invisible to all that stuff.
yeah, fear wreaks havoc on us in a lot of different ways for sure. And that's just one of them.
Right.
Definitely.
100%. Yeah.
For sure. So tell me about your tarot readings. We got away from that a little bit, and I know that you and I have previously discussed how you read intuitively, and I'm not sure that a lot of people may understand what intuitive tarot card reading is. So would you like to delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So tarot, for those that don't know, it's a 78 card deck broken down into two arcanas. One is the major arcana, one is the minor arcana. And then the major arcana is where you find like the lovers, the hermit, the sun, the moon, like those heavy hitter cards you see Hollywood pull out in movies. And then you have the minor arcana, which is suits, which I love to tell people that it's basically a deck of playing cards, that minor arcana. And that always fascinates people just to realize that there's a correlation with a deck of cards that they could play with, with their friends. But the minor arcana is the only difference is because they have ace all the way up to king, but they have a jack. No, sorry. The playing cards have jack and queens. And then tarot has page and knights, queen and kings. But otherwise, it's basically the same as far as that goes. But you can read tarot just by pulling out the cards. Technically, you don't have to necessarily make it an intuitive experience. But I don't believe it's the cards themselves that are speaking to you. I think it's whatever, like you said, I love that you said intention. It's whatever intention that you're putting out there. So if you're putting out the intention of, I need guidance, and I'm looking for guidance from my highest power, my highest good, you're going to get that. And so when I say that I read intuitively, part of it is I know the basic meaning of the cards, and that can change, by the way. So if anyone is learning tarot, please don't feel confined to follow what the book says or confined to what Google says about each card, because there's so much information out there. You need to go with what speaks to you. And that was my biggest lesson into tarot, because like I said, I had been reading for years. But when I started doing this professionally, right before I started doing this professionally, I did take a course. But this course, the way that she taught, her name is Lindsay Mack. The way Lindsay Mack taught was in that more broad sense of listen to your intuition. This is my belief, and her belief system just resonated with me, and I was able to suddenly memorize the cards very easily. And then since the cards have grown and evolved and they speak to me differently, but you want to at least, whether you follow the mainstream traditional like messages of the tarot or you want to do it your own way, I do think it's important to have a base meaning for each card, so you kind of already know what the basic meaning of it is. But the intuitive part is when you're also getting things that are coming through you that's not just what the cards are saying. For instance, doesn't happen often, but sometimes the way that I read a card will speak differently to me than I've ever read it. And I've learned that that's my intuition or higher power speaking through me, because this the way that it's speaking to me is how the person needs to hear it. So
Mhm.
that's where that intuition comes from. It's not just the science of knowing the cards and knowing the placement of the cards, because when you pull cards, you also, most readers, not all, use something called a spread, where each placement has a meaning plus the cards meaning themselves, and you put them together. So that's like the science of it. But the intuitive part is when you're able to see that and bring more into it than just what's on the cards and what's laying on the table.
Yeah, that's to me, it's my favorite way. It's my favorite way. I haven't taken any classes myself for my card readings. I just do it all intuitively, and it's incredible. I love it because again, we talked before about letting things box us in and keeping us, where we have these certain expectations. And I think there's value in knowing the traditional way of reading cards because I feel like that gives us kind of a basis, for what we're doing. But I also feel like doing it intuitively just kind of allows us to break outside of that box and, like you said, get that additional information. And sometimes that's the most needed information by the person you're reading for. That those extra bits from spirit.
Yeah, when I first started picking up, as I was doing a reading, when I first started happening, where the way that I would normally read the card was not coming to me that way, it freaked me out, because in my mind I thought I was being a fraud, because now I'm gonna say something that I normally don't say for cards that I normally don't read that way for. Like, it scared me. And I think it was probably the first time that because I may have ignored it the first few times that happened, because it freaked me out. I didn't understand it. But eventually, I did decide to just say, read it how I was feeling it. And it just landed. But whenever I tried to ignore that, there was always some kind of I always felt resistance in the message that I was trying to put in. And that's also when I learned about ego, because that's another part about being at least an ethical reader. You need to learn how to remove your ego and not be judging the message as you're sharing it,
Mhm.
because it's not for you.
Right.
You're not supposed to understand it. So that was my biggest lesson, was just speaking what I'm seeing and sensing, and not editing it or sugarcoating it. I mean, I'll speak with tact and I'll be gentle with it, but I'm not going to try and tell you something I'm not seeing. And there are times where, like, the people pleaser in me, because I like to say that I'm a recovering people pleaser. The people pleaser in me is like, I don't want to say that, and I'll
Yeah.
like struggle internally with saying that out loud. But then once I do, everything's okay. Not only do I get the reciprocation of, okay, no, they really needed to hear that. They're not mad at me. It's okay. And they'll even thank me, like, this isn't what I wanted to hear, but I know this is what I needed to hear. And I hear that over and over and over again. But it came from me starting to trust those messages coming through me that I initially was afraid of, because I thought it was saying that there's something wrong with me. And actually, it was just saying that, no, you're ready for the next level, really.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing because we don't always see that we're ready for the next level until spirit is like, hey, and spirit is so relentless with it. Sometimes it's like, give in or suffer the consequences, basically. You get that, those really hard shoves by spirit sometimes. So I think it's really cool that we get that guidance.
I like to say it's like little bits, like little jumps of faith, or little full cards, because the full card is all about the leap of faith. And
Yes.
it doesn't happen often, thankfully, because I think spirit understands that there's like a level of, like, you have to build up to it. But there's been some where I'm like, I don't want to say that, and like I had one at an event. Um, I was hired for an event, and this gentleman sat down with me, and he's super cool, very friendly, and he's like, I want to ask about my relationship. No, he said, tell me about my love life. And so what I always say to that is, are you in a relationship? Because that determines how I read it, kind of. So he said he was in a relationship. So I told him I'm going to read the impact on like how this relationship is impacting him. So like what's working for him, a challenged area, and then higher self message. The moment I saw the challenged area, I already I just knew what it meant. And I didn't want to say it. I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know, but when I got there, so it was, the Seven of Cups reversed. And what I was getting from that, especially in the challenge placement, and I said it as much as I was like cringing on the inside, what I was picking up was, so I'm getting the feeling that you are faithful to your partner, but you kind of wish you had more options. And that could go sideways in so many different ways with the wrong people, right? And I think that was afraid of. I was afraid of getting like the backlash of, excuse me, but instead his jaw dropped. And then like literally it was a like his jaw literally dropped.
Yeah.
And then he's like, that is so spot on. He said, I love my wife. She's an amazing woman, but I'm a little more freakier than she is. And then he's like, and I can see how that could be a challenge in our relationship and how I need to figure out what I want to do with that information, but
Yeah.
I didn't want to say it, but that's what I was being called to. So, I mean, I've had lots of little leaps of faith, or I've had people who will ask about a relationship and I'm just getting strongly, it's not going well, but they haven't given me any reason to think it's not going well. But I'm just getting this strong feeling of like, all the reasons why this really isn't a good relationship for you. And those always make me nervous.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times they're like, yeah, that makes sense. If I had tried to edit it or make it sound fluffy or happy or something like that, one, it wouldn't have been ethical. They wouldn't have gotten anything valuable from it. But two, it wouldn't have even resonated with them.
Right.
So even when I get these like heavier, like, I don't want to tell them this, I've learned to just go with it and to just speak. And it's what they need to hear every time.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And then, of course, what they do with it is on them after they walk away from the reading. We don't get to control the outcome. We just get to pass on the information that we're given. So,
Yeah, that part's hard. But I have a little bit of a funny story around that concept. I was hired by a party for a Mardi Gras. Sorry, I was hired by a family for a Mardi Gras party, and then they hired me back a couple months later for a Sweet 16 party. And so when they're setting me up where I was getting, where I was going to be sitting and stuff, one of I think it was the girl's dad, called out to a guy in the backyard and was like, hey, she's giving readings if you want to get a reading from her. And the guy in the backyard goes, nope, I saw her last time. She didn't tell me anything good.
wow.
I didn't know how to respond to that. I felt really awkward and out of place, and especially because I don't remember people I sit with. I mean, some of the people who sat with me that night, I was like, oh, I kind of remember seeing your face, but I'm not going to remember what I told them. You know what I mean? It's channeled, so it's not for me to retain. So I was just like, oh my God, that is so awkward. I don't know what to say to that. And then after the dad went inside, the guy looked over at me and he's like, you know what, though? I was in a bad mood that day. And honestly, all you did was tell me that I need to get off my ass and start doing stuff. Because I was just sitting in front of the TV all day. And, since I've seen you, I've actually started going out and doing more things and I feel better. So, actually, I take that back. You're actually pretty spot on. And so, I mean, he didn't need to give me that. And I'm grateful he did. I'm really
Right.
glad he did because it was, I mean, I was feeling very, very uncomfortable before that. Because I mean, I know I don't resonate with everyone. And sometimes I'll sit with people who it's just not resonating. And I just kind of go back to this space of maybe I'm not the reader for you.
Right.
Because sometimes you need to hear it from another person. And so, but it's still, the part of me that second guesses myself and doubts is like, oh, I don't know what to do with that. But when he followed that up, I was like, okay, that makes me feel a little better. But it's true though. He that's how he took it. At the time, he was very almost offended, I guess, by the reading. And but then in hindsight, he was able to see that it was actually really helpful. And it sounds like he actually did something about it, probably more on an unconscious level. But, that is that is hard for being the conduit, because it's like, I'm not the coach. I'm not the person that's going to guide you and walk you through how to get to the other side. I'm
Right.
more the one that's shining the light on what you need to work on to get to the other side.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard being in that space, because all I get to do is relay information, and the rest is on them.
Yeah.
And like, I've had some people tell me, "Oh my gosh, that was like a mini therapy session." And I always say, "No, no, no. That was not therapy. This is showing you what you could take to therapy."
Right.
This is showing you what a professional could help you unpack, but this is not a therapy session. It's just information. So, yeah, I would say that's probably one of the hardest parts as a reader, is not being able to know what they do with it and hoping that they do the best with it.
Right. Absolutely. And to your point about it feeling like a therapy session, sometimes it is a big relief to have the light shined on what we need to realize and recognize, because we often don't. And it's just like, so it is a big relief. So I can see where it would feel like a therapy session, even though it's not actually a therapy session.
Right. It's like I said, it's showing you what to take to therapy, because
Yeah.
now that, you might be able to see some like superpowers, or like, your gifts are highlighted, but also usually what comes with that is the things that are holding you back from your gifts, things that are keeping you small, or keeping you, your traumas or your blocks. And just knowing that they're there is not enough to fix them. you know,
That's
it's
true.
the first step,
Yep.
because you can't fix something unless you know there's a problem. You know what I mean? So there's no change unless you know something needs to change. So that's like, it's like the catalyst, but then you still have to take and do something else with it.
Right. Absolutely. Very well said. I love that. So is there anything else you'd like to chat about today?
I guess one other thing I would mention is that, and I know this varies. Some readers read differently, but I don't personally like to focus on predictive type readings, which I think a lot of people who think of tarot, they think of fortune telling
Yeah.
and future predictions. And I would say probably a good amount of readers, though, do read similarly to me, just from what I've kind of pulled and paid attention to. There are readers that still do the predictions, which is totally fine. It's not something that I personally resonate with, because I think the future is always changing. And so I think, I personally believe that the future is a byproduct of what we do in the now. So when I read for my clients, there is usually a future card, and I can tell you energetically where things are headed as of right now. But I like to use that more as just something to be mindful of. So if
Mhm.
you don't like what's there, you can always change it.
Yeah.
And what I like to focus on, and I know that we talked about me doing a reading for you, so if you still wanted me to give that to you, we could totally demonstrate this. But I usually like to focus on where you're coming from, where you're at, and then the rest of the cards are the tools to help you get to the future that you desire. So
Mhm.
that way, you have something. I'm not just telling you, "Oh, this is where you're headed, good luck." It's, this is where you're headed. And these are some invitations and tools and suggestions to help you as you move into that future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. And I mean, we can do a reading if that's if you're comfortable with that, so you can kind of demonstrate what it is you do. I'm down with it.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Are we on any kind of time restraints?
No, no,
Okay,
we've
then
been
I'll
talking now for about 45 minutes or so, I think. So
okay, perfect. So so what I usually recommend is either, if you have a question in mind or an area in your life you'd like to focus on, or we could just see what your higher self wants you to know. Do you have any questions or any ideas of where you want to focus?
yeah, so I do, but I don't know that I want to say it on here at this time. So I'm going to go with, let's do the higher self reading.
Higher self? Okay. So I have two decks that I use. I'm gonna let you decide which one that you'd rather work with. I have one called the Light Seers deck and one called the Muse deck. Ironically, they're by the same artist, which was not planned, but I was meant to work with this artist's cards, I guess. But this is an example of the Light Seers deck.
Mhm.
And I like to call it the light seers deck, actually, ironically, because it is called light seers, but I like to refer to this as my shadow deck. It tends to get a little more like into the shadow side. And then the other one is the muse deck. And this is like a card from that one. And I
Let's
like to say this one's kind of like Alice in Wonderlandy.
let's do the first one.
Okay. The shadow one
No, the
or the light seers.
stick, the shadow one.
Okay. It's
Mm,
so funny. I never even realized this till I said that to you right now, but I was like, oh my gosh, I call the light seers deck my shadow deck. That is so ironic.
It's so funny.
But to be fair, and I love this analogy, when you shine light on something, that's when you get bigger shadows. The bigger the light, the bigger the shadows. But that's just because you need that duality, and that shadows is just showing you what you need to work on. So a lot of people don't realize that light and dark, they go hand in hand.
They do.
It's funny, even the deck itself feels heavier. And I don't know if it actually is or not, but it has like a heavier feel to it.
That's so
The other one feels just more light. It's so interesting. So this is what I like to call my higher self spread. It's one that I created, not like on purpose. It just kind of kept coming up, and it kind of was created organically. Um, so it's 7 cards. I'm gonna go over a theme, past, present, future energies, and then higher self messages. Um, and then so feel free if you want to comment as I go. Like, don't be afraid to interrupt me or anything, because otherwise I'm just gonna get into it and just start talking, you know what I mean? But if you have to comment or you want to comment, please feel free to do that at any point, or you can comment afterwards. Like, either way is totally fine. You're not going to like ruin my my connection by saying something. So if you want to, feel free. But so starting with the theme, we have the 4 of Wands. And so this one, I feel like right now a big theme of your life is learning how to have fun. Is learning how to make space for fun. And I love this because I'm not feeling resistance. I feel like this is more like you're getting curious, and now you're trying to figure out, like, what do you like to do and what can you do that's more freeing? And again, just play. Play is kind of coming up for me. So that can come up in different ways, whether you're going out with friends or you're finding a creative project, but something that I like to say the 4 of Wands is like a mini vacation, but it's not like actually taking a vacation. It's like you're putting down the world for a bit and you're just focusing on your joy and having a good time. Sorry, I had a call come in.
You're fine.
Can you hear me?
I
Okay.
can. Yeah.
I put myself on do not disturb, but I guess my sister is not on that. So she's calling in. So yeah, so I feel like the higher self is saying your theme right now is to keep doing that. Because again, I feel like this is something you've already started. Like, this isn't just something that you're being called into. It's something that you're already playing with and trying to figure out how to do it more. And so higher self is just like, yes, do that. Your joy is important. And I think it's so funny because society says work now, play later. And every time this card comes up, it's like, no, play while you work.
Yeah.
And find ways to be in your joy. Because especially when, let's say you're going through a really difficult time, it's so much harder to find your joy when you're in a difficult place versus if you're able to kind of put everything down for a minute, go have a good time. It's easier to bring that joy back into the difficult space because you're already in a better, you're in your joy. So yeah, I feel like that's your theme is higher self is saying you're finding your play and your joy. Keep doing that. Like, that's exactly what you need to be doing right now.
That's so interesting. And that's why I love this stuff so much. Like, I love giving readings and getting readings from someone who's really connected like this. Because I kid you not, my friend and I just had this conversation this morning.
Oh
We
my
just
gosh.
had this freaking conversation.
I
That's
love that.
I love it too. It's awesome.
So looking at your recent past, I have the Emperor. And I really love this too because I'm wondering, yeah, I bet you this is correlating. Okay, sorry. I love it. Part of my gift is I'm able to like see, as I go, I start to see all the connections and it just excites me. So the Emperor, I feel like in your more recent past, you really started learning how to step into your power. You really started learning that your voice matters, that you're allowed to take up space, you're allowed to rock the boat. You don't have to play small to, you know, be in the world. And there's also an element that comes with it usually of sometimes imposter syndrome that comes a lot with learning how to step into your power of like, well, who am I to put myself out there and be in this space of being in my own power unapologetically. So this is more past energy, but I feel like you went through something that really helped you find your voice and help you find your power and help you realize that no, you're not an imposter. Your voice matters. You're here to help other people, like teach other people too, because that's part of the Emperor is kind of stepping into a role of guidance for others as well. But it starts with learning that you can do that for yourself. And so I feel like that was a really pivotal moment for you. And so that's, I feel like you taking the space to have more fun and play in your life is you choosing you. It's you saying that you're allowed to, that it's okay for you to take up space and have a good time without repercussions or consequence. Like you are allowed to do that.
Right.
And presently, which I just love, is the Queen of Wands reversed. So she is reversed. So there is an element of you still learning how to trust yourself and trust your magic. But let me tell you about the Queen of Wands upright and why I love this card so much. The Queen of Wands represents, again, she's a leader. She's creative. She's powerful. She knows who belongs in our life, who doesn't. She does it gracefully. So she's not going to come off as overbearing. It's going to be more like, you can come to my table, or no, I don't think that we're a good match. But she's not going to do it in like a condescending way. She knows her worth and she knows her magic. She knows that only she can light up the world the way that she can and the way that she does it, which is unique to her. So whenever the Queen of Wands comes up reverse, it's basically saying that you're learning how to be more in touch with your inner queen. And you're still kind of second guessing yourself, which explains that Emperor energy of like that imposter syndrome of like, well, who am I to fully say that I'm gifted in this? And the Queen of Wands, she's unapologetic about it. She's like, this is my gift. This is what I'm good at. And I'm not going to hide behind it. I'm not going to try and downplay it. I'm not going to compare myself to others because I know their gift is just as important as my gift. It just shows up differently. So especially the more you're able to learn how to fully embody your gifts, you're also going to help lead other people to do the same, which is really cool. So I feel like that Four of Wands energy, being in your joy, being in your play, that's just going to help you become more and more open to your gifts, to believing in yourself, because when you're in your joy, you're in the present moment. You're not worried about the past. You're not worried about the future. You're just in the now, and you're able to just create as you go. And so that's part of the queen in her magic is she's just embodies her authenticity and what she brings to the table. So I do feel like right now there is this journey of, self-power, trusting yourself, taking up space, owning your magic. And I do feel like that's why finding your joy right now and taking time for play is going to be super important in helping you navigate that and find that. Moving into the near future, I have the 10 of Wands and the Ace of Cups. So I do feel like, which also makes sense why the Four of Wands, why Spirit is like, make sure you take time to play, because it does seem like you, at least as of right now, moving into the near future, you are kind of taking a lot on your plate. And so there's a lot of responsibility and things that you're like saying yes to. And higher self is really saying that you need to take inventory of like, okay, well, what do you actually have space for? And what are you just saying yes to because maybe you feel like you should? And it's not really something that you're aligned with, or you just don't have the time or the energy or the space for it. So there is an element of overwhelm that is kind of you're like leaning in that direction. And so that Four of Wands, that taking time for those many vacations and that joy and that play, it's going to be really important to helping you, I think, one, carry everything that you're carrying, but also help you really just discern what's important to carry and what's not. because sometimes we carry things that we can either delegate and can have someone else help us with it, or things that we don't even need to carry at all.
Mm.
So, and so I feel like that could be the biggest thing that's going to keep you from fully embodying your queen and fully taking up space. Because if you're too bogged down to make space to fully look at these areas of yourself that higher self is like, it's in there, let it out, you know. If you're not able to make space to connect with that, you're just going to be too busy and overwhelmed to, you know, to really step into your power and in your gifts that are very obviously here. You're just like second guessing it.
That's totally on point. Yeah.
And then the higher self message to the near future is the Ace of Cups. And so I feel like, so the Ace of Cups, she's very, oh wait, no, this is, never mind. My brain saw the Queen of Cups. Ace of Cups, totally different card. And this one actually makes a lot more sense with the Ten of Cups. So the Ace of Cups, the way that I read this one, it's basically speaking to not being aware of how much self-care you are doing for yourself and how full your cup is. So there's different cards that speak to self-care in different ways, but this one specifically is saying, hey, you need to do daily check-ins because you're not even aware of what your cup is. It could be full, it could be empty. You wouldn't even know because you're not really in touch with how full or how little it is. So, but usually when this one comes up, it's more on the side of empty than it is on the side of full. So with the Ace of Cups, the invitation is how can you start maybe creating some kind of a daily routine that allows you to check in with how full your cup is. And especially with that being tied into the Ten of Wands, which is about overwhelm and taking on too much, one of the ways that you'll be able to counteract that is by checking in with yourself, is by saying, oh, hey, my cup's really empty today. I need to refill it. I need to do some self-nourishment and some self-care. And when you're able to refill your cup, you might, you know, hopefully you'll be able to see, oh, you know what? That thing I've been taking on, I can't anymore. And I see now it's draining me or it's depleting me, you know. So being able to check in with yourself, I think it's going to be really helpful in helping you kind of take inventory, because right now you're leaning towards overwhelmed, but you're not at the place where it's like, oh my God, you really need to unload. It's more like you need to pay attention to this before it becomes a problem. And so I feel like higher self is saying that the checking in with yourself emotionally is going to be really, really important. And then the two cards in the middle. Interesting. So first I have the King of Pentacles reversed. So, and then it's right next to the Queen of Pentacles upright. So interesting that they're both side by side. But the King of Pentacles, this one is a really great card because it speaks to security and it speaks to stability. And usually there's like a transactional aspect of it where like you are doing what you love and you're getting compensated for that. So you're kind of in your purpose and you're getting compensated and taken care of. But there's also an element of taking everything that you've learned and giving back to the world as well. So there's this giving back knowledge because now you're like in the space of like being secure. And so with it being reversed, I'm getting the feeling that you are secure, you are stable, like you have the means, but there's a part of you that's almost afraid to take that leap of faith as far as like giving back to the world more. And it's more like the transaction of when you share your knowledge or when you do readings, for instance, or something like that. Like, I feel like you're afraid to fully jump into it because you're afraid that the security will go away. Like you like that, having that security, that stability, and you have it, but there's a part of it that's like afraid to lean more into your gifts and lean more into what you're meant to give back to the world because you're afraid the security will go away. Like there's this kind of lack mentality. And with the Queen here, the Queen of Pentacles, she's very rooted. She's very like, she knows what she needs to do. She's very like, yeah. So it's almost like the King is representing your fears of not being rooted and secure. And the Queen is like, no, but we're fine. We got everything we need. We are right where we should be. There is an invitation for more self-care physically, but I feel like you're better at the physical self-care than you are at the at the emotional. Like you're better at taking care of your body. So I feel like you have that down. And so I feel like that's why she's upright. And I feel like she's kind of reminding you like, hey, the way you're taking care of yourself, you're just as taken care of energetically, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so I do feel like, and that does come back to the Emperor and the Queen of Wands, is maybe that's the fear of really owning yourself and really embodying all your magic and showing up in the world, as you're afraid that it's going to somehow mess with your stability and security. And higher self is saying, no, you've got the security and stability. You're good, but you're holding yourself back when you don't have to be.
Mhm. Yeah, that's totally.
So that's everything that.
Just had that epiphany yesterday morning, actually, when I was journaling. And it surprised me a little, actually. I was like, holy shit, really? So that's completely on point with that little tidbit I got for myself yesterday morning while I was journaling. So it was very on point. Thank
Wow.
you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's amazing, but it's higher self will show you what you need to hear, and you know what I mean. I hear it all the time. Like, whoa, I was just thinking about this. I was just doing this. I hear that all the time,
Yeah.
and there's a reason why, because it's basically spirits like, yes, pay attention. Yes, there's a reason why this came up, and the more, I mean, sometimes, we got to get hit on the head with a 2x4, but before we really get it,
Yeah.
but that's why it shows up that way. It's like a tap. Okay. Hello. Is this thing on?
Right. Can you hear me now?
Right. Exactly.
So good. So thank you so much for your reading. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I would love for you to tell everyone where they can connect with you if they'd love to have a reading of their own from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is spiritjourneycollective.com. And you can find all my services on there. I offer one-on-one sessions. I offer email readings. So for those that maybe have scheduling issues, or maybe you just don't want to talk to me, but you want to ask me a question, the email reading is just as you get the same quality. I send you your reading through a voice recording, a personalized voice recording with a picture of the cards drawn. And then I also offer a new offering, which I'm excited about, called the Alignment Project. And this one is basically taking a reading, kind of like what you just heard me do with Dee, but it takes I this one comes with a PDF of actual actionable steps to work through a problem or a block or trauma to help you get to the other side. So it's a reading plus an actual like roadmap, like a physical roadmap that we'll talk and create together to help you get to the other side. And that's called the Alignment Project. Yeah, so you can find me at my website. And then I'm also on Instagram at spirit_journey_collective. I'm technically on Facebook and other ones, but Instagram is really where I'm at the most. And that's how you can find me.
Yeah. And then you also have a podcast. So you'll send me all your links and I'll put those in the description box below the video so everyone can find you really easily. It'll be all right there.
I'm still learning. Thank you. I'm still learning to remember to mention my podcast because it's pretty new. I mean, it's not as new now. I started in February, but yes, I do have a podcast as well called Spirit Journey Collective. In fact, Dee's going to be a guest on it soon. I'm excited to have her. And yeah, so my podcast just likes to focus on like the journeys of people finding their purpose and their mission and living in alignment. So it's just a lot of fun. Love talking to people from all over the world, and I love it.
That's awesome. I'm so happy for you. So we'll get you all linked up down below. And thank you again for being my guest. And thank you everyone for joining us on this beautiful episode. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I had a little brain fart there for a second, but that's okay. We all do that. I have also linked for the Spiritually Speaking podcast group in the description box below this video also. So we will see you on the next one. And as always, I love you all.